Why hello there friends, it's Emma here, the Bookish Princess. Welcome to my spring reading vlog. First of all, I wanted to wish you all a very happy Easter. Christ is risen, he is risen indeed. I've been taking a little bit of a break from YouTube posting and social media and the internet over Lent, and it's been very nice to have a digital detox. I did spend some of the time that I usually spend editing videos and filming videos reading. If you checked in on my blog throughout Lent, then these reviews might sound familiar because I did do a little March reading wrap-up over on my blog. It's bookishprincess.substack.com. So when I last saw you all, we were just wrapping up Feb Regency, which was so much fun, and I did have a couple of Regency-era books that did carry over into March. One of them was Northanger Abbey. I mentioned this a couple times in my Feb Regency vlog because I was reading The Mysteries of Udolpho by Anne Radcliffe, and that is very much sort of the inspiration and mentioned a lot in Northanger Abbey. The characters are reading it. Catherine Morland loves it, so I'd been wanting to pick up Northanger Abbey, and it was so much fun. There were lots of little things that stood out to me that I hadn't really noticed before because I hadn't read The Mysteries of Udolpho before. I was breaking in this beautiful Penguin English Classics hardcover edition that I have, and I realized it has some really excellent footnotes, and a lot of them told about Mysteries of Udolpho. There are even some beautiful Regency-era paintings of Bath, of the different landscapes described, and the person who made these notes, there's a little map of Bath, was mentioning that Jane Austen was very precise in how she describes locations. Like John Thorpe and Isabella and Catherine and her brother go out on, you know, a little open carriage expedition, and they want to go to Clifton, they want to go see a nearby castle, and the footnote said that Jane Austen, like, got it exactly right, even like the distances, and John Thorpe sort of exaggerating how fast his horse can go and how fast he can cross these distances. It reminded me of how my friend Anne, we did a video together ranking Jane Austen's film adaptations, and she mentioned during that John Thorpe talking about his carriage was like the same as modern guys talking about cars, and John Thorpe really does talk up his carriage. I also had to laugh. He mentions Camilla by Fanny Burney towards the beginning, and that was one of the books that I was reading for Feb Regency. Still am reading, to be honest, because it's a long one, and I've been listening to it over audiobook. I feel like I make some progress, I kind of lose interest, put it aside for a while, put it back on, try to make some more progress. But in Northanger Abbey, the way John Thorpe describes like his synopsis of the novel just made me laugh, because like it's the first chapter, you know, like it's the first couple chapters, and it definitely continues far after John Thorpe read it. Whenever I reread Jane Austen, it's fun to note just little descriptions and beautiful bits of writing that stand out to me that maybe I never quite noticed before. This one I have noticed before, but I just love it. It's when Catherine is with the Thorpes and they're trying to convince her to come out in the carriage again. And there's a conflict of wills, but Catherine says, "If I could not be persuaded into doing what I thought wrong, I never will be tricked into it." Which I just love that. That's such a great sentiment. And then later in the story, I wouldn't call this a spoiler, but it is towards the end of the book, so if you're worried about spoilers, there's a little warning. Eleanor and Henry in this quote are, of course, the Tilneys, who I absolutely love. The kindness, the earnestness of Eleanor's manner in pressing her to stay, and Henry's gratified look on being told that her stay was determined, were such sweet proofs of her importance with them, as left her only just so much solicitude as the human mind can never do comfortably without. Isn't that funny? The human mind can never do comfortably, completely without some kind of worry. She did, almost always, believe that Henry loved her, and quite always that his father and sister loved and even wished her to belong to them. And believing so far, her doubts and anxieties were merely sportive irritations. Sportive irritations, isn't that great? It reminds me in Pride and Prejudice, when Lizzie goes on a summer trip with her uncle and Aunt Gardner. They were supposed to go to a certain part of England. I think it was the Lake District or the Peak District. Anyway, they end up having to shorten their trip and they're not able to make it all the way. But there's a line about how, like, with this sort of one peculiar irritation, they were guarded against, like, greater annoyances. I love Catherine with Eleanor and Henry. Eleanor Tilney stood out to me a little bit more on this reread. I wish we had another book About Eleanor, she gets like a love story too, but it's like so minor. I loved when Eleanor and Catherine first meet and Catherine is talking about Henry, and Eleanor, like you can see, realizes how Catherine feels about Henry, and it's just so sweet. You wonder what the conversations between Eleanor and Henry about Catherine. So yes, hugely enjoyed my reread of Northanger Abbey. And then Camilla, still working my way through. You know, in the course of the typical novel that you would read, you know, 300 or 400 pages, there are lots of misunderstandings. And Camilla is more like 700 pages, and somehow sustaining yourself through the misunderstandings for that length, it's like you just get frustrated. It's like, come on guys, you should not be misunderstanding each other. Although you guys will have to let me know if any of you feel that way when you're reading books as well, because I often get so frustrated by the hero or heroine with whatever misunderstanding arises, but at the same time, if that misunderstanding wasn't there, then there would be no story, there would be no plot. So I realize that's a little bit unreasonable of me. I do like the characters, especially the Tyrell family and the daughters with their beautiful names, Camilla, Eugenia. Eugenia, so this is a spoiler, this happens pretty early in the book. In fact, this happens around the time John Thorpe gave up on Camilla, but still, it's a little bit of a spoiler. But Eugenia has a bad fall and also gets the smallpox. Her skin has been marked, her growth has been marred, so she hasn't, you know, grown to the full size, and her family really loves her and wants to protect her from kind of the cruelty of the outside world. And even if she doesn't have beauty, she has great knowledge. She has studied extensively and learned a lot. But we do come to this crisis where she kind of realizes that she's different, and how that plays out was just really beautifully and thoughtfully done. And the advice Mr. Tyrell tries to give Eugenia and tries to give Camilla as well, like the rest of the novel, it's very long. Like he literally writes a whole sermon for Camilla at one point and gives it to her before she leaves for Tunbridge Wells. That's a town I've never been to in a Regency era novel, of course, because Jane Austen goes to Lyme and Bath. There was one quotation from that long sermon that Camilla's father wrote for her, how she should struggle against her feelings, because in this instance her feelings really don't serve her. You know, like she has a disappointment that she just needs to get over. She needs to get on with it. And Mr. Tyrell says something like, she should struggle against herself as she would struggle against an enemy. And I just thought that was such an interesting thought, and it put me in mind of another quotation from Emily of Deep Valley by Maud Hart Lovelace, a little bit random, but in that book, Emily, the heroine, is struggling against loneliness, and she sets herself up on a program of like trying to keep herself busy, like getting involved in new things, learning new things, you know, trying to meet new people. And the line goes something like that she had to guard herself against loneliness as if it was an enemy with a gun, which like is just such a striking image. And yet I feel like that advice and Mr. Tyrell's advice are pretty sound. There are times when, you know, you're tempted to give into loneliness or despair or frustration. You really have to look at that part of yourself as an enemy that you are fighting against. And that holds true in every age, because of course the Regency era was the early 1800s, and Emily of Deep Valley is set in the early 1900s. But that's the lovely thing about reading books that were written in the past. Is that you see these little instances of advice and good sense and humanity that are constant. In spite of all the rest of the change in the world, those things don't change. I went and gathered a stack of some of the other things that I have been reading this month. I had bought a few Agatha Christie's that I had not yet read. I had not yet broken them in, so I did read one of them this month. I ended up reading it all in one day, which I was not planning to. At first, I picked it up and, you know, was just enjoying the Britishness of it, but then the mystery really pulled me in, and I had to know who'd done it. It was a really good, fairly convoluted set of circumstances. A little bit creepy, which, I mean, all murder mysteries are a little bit creepy, and yet Agatha Christie somehow manages to still be charming and cozy. Let's be honest, the cup of tea on the cover was a big part of why I bought it, and it does tie into the story. I hate it when you have a cover that has nothing to do with the story. I kind of like these HarperCollins editions, though. I like the the spine as well as the covers. Most of the ones that I have at the moment are Poirot. This was the first Miss Marple I had read in a while, but I thought it was really excellent. I'm gonna have to pick up some more Miss Marples. I also picked up The Mating Season. It had been quite a long time since I last reread this one. P.G. Wodehouse has some familiar tropes that he uses in his novels. One of them is the mistaken identity. Visiting a, grand British house, beautiful estate of the aristocracy under an assumed name and assumed identity. And if you like that trope, then The Mating Season is one for you. Also, if you enjoy British village concerts and the pain of having to perform and attend them, this has a great village concert chapter or two. P.G. Wodehouse himself must have sat through some doozies of village concerts because he writes about them in such a hilarious way. There are also so many great esoteric, eclectic references from literature and, books that you would not think Bertie Wooster would have read. But he probably picked some of them up from Jeeves. And he did win a prize in Sunday school. I just love his writing style. This was the quotation I quoted in my blog post. In dishing up this narrative for family consumption, it has been my constant aim throughout to get the right word in the right place and to avoid fobbing the customers off with something weak and inexpressive when they have a right to expect the telling phrase. It means a bit of extra work, but one has one's code. We will therefore expunge that came at the conclusion of the previous spasm and substitute it for curvetted. There was a flash of pink and Esmond Haddock curvetted in. I don't know if you have ever seen a fellow curvet, but war horses used to do it rather freely in the old days, and Esmond Haddock was doing it now. His booted feet spurned the carpet in a sort of rhythmic dance, something on the lines of that of the recent Poppy Kegley Bassington, and it scarcely needed the ringing hunting cries which he uttered to tell me that here stood a bird who was as full of beans and buck as a bird could be. See, P.G. Wodehouse just has such great vocabulary, such great literary references, but then also great slang of the 20s and 30s. It's always fun to go on a house visit with Bertie and Jeeves. And then you may recall I read Dancing Peel earlier this year by Lorna Hill. These are children's books, young adult books, and they are about a young dancer named Annette Dancy. She lives in this beautiful but crumbling fortress castle near the border of Scotland and England in Northumberland. In the first book, Dancing Peel, we hear about the home, and she meets Angus, who is from the Isle of Skye, and he's very proud of the Isle of Skye, which is, way up off the coast of Scotland. And so we hear a little bit about that from Angus. So it's very exciting. Dancer's luck takes us to Skye. Most of it takes place in Skye, but we do also hear about the progression of Annette's dancing career. She is doing a summer tour with her company, with her school, and they are producing a work called La Sylphidee. I'm probably saying that incorrectly, but just the way dancing is worked into the story. I mean, it's not just a part of the story, it's, at the heart of the story. And it feels like Lorna Hill obviously loved dancing herself and understood this world. There we go, La Sylphide. And the cover is actually from that, is actually from that ballet. So yes, the kind of combination of the beautiful Scottish scenery and the dancing is so wonderful. Annette gets up to her usual escapades, but Angus is on hand to help her out. I love the illustrations in here as well. They're really beautiful. Annette is just so graceful, and the illustrations have such a graceful quality as well. They're so charming. I'm gonna have to pick up The Little Dancer is the next one, so I think I'm gonna have to pick that up next. I have also been reading a gardening book. This is from my English Journeys series, The Beauties of a Cottage Garden by Gertrude Jekyll. As I said in my blog post, it feels like if Lady Catherine or the Countess of Grantham, the Dowager Countess, wrote a book about gardens, this would be it, because the way she expresses herself is just so emphatic. There's a whole chapter ranting about how people never describe colors properly. She obviously loves gardens and has quite a beautiful garden of her own. So it's just a fun thing to read in the spring as I am preparing my garden for the season. You guys may recall back in January, I said I was planning to make a little TBR jar wall. I have all these cute little jars from my Bon Maman Advent calendar, and I thought I would put some reading suggestions. I'd do one in each jar, and you guys left me so many excellent suggestions in the comments of that video. I'm so excited to get to them. Just writing them all out and putting them in the jars made me wish that I could just start reading all of them right away. I think there was only one duplicate. Two of you guys suggested Death Comes for the Archbishop by Willa Cather. So now I'm really hoping that I pull that one pretty soon. But if you have any more suggestions, I have more jars. So leave them down in the comments below. But I'm really pleased with how this turned out. So here we have the beautiful completed TBR jar tower. Thank you so much to everybody who sent in a suggestion. So I'm going to go ahead and pick one. I think I'm going to grab this one over here by Akbar. Let's see what we got. Unearthing the Secret Garden by Marta McDowell. This was from Teresa. Well, that's very seasonal. I'm going to have to go to the library and pick that up. Come here. Are you just excited or are you scared of the lightning?
Oh, and thunder too.
update rather than a reading update, although it's really kind of both combined. I did get the Blessed is She Lenten journal this year. It's called All She Had. So it's full of different stories and readings written by like their staff writers, and of course also gospel readings, and then there are also these blank pages that you can fill in and answer some questions, just spend some time with God, because writing can be a great way to talk to God. The last time I got a Blessed is She Lenten journal was back in 2018. They're a little pricey, so it's hard to justify it every year, but I did really enjoy having this. Every single day there is either a short reading or I think the journal pages were on like Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, which was nice because if you fell behind for a day, it was easy to catch up. I didn't necessarily love all the stories, but there were some writers. Olivia Spears, it seemed like whenever her name popped up, I really enjoyed those writings. Psalm 23 promises us God's provision. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. Yet while our mouths proclaim this surety, our hearts believe that unless I plant the seed, the pastures won't be green, and unless I dig the trench, the still waters won't appear. We create checklists for our prayer lives and personal relationships, convinced if we do the right things in the right way at the right time, then we will achieve and acquire that for which we long. And then we wonder why we are left feeling less safe, less restored, less secure. So we chase the ever-moving needle of security, but our gauge is broken. We are quicker to check our boxes than check our hearts, and we never measure up to our own expectations. But Jesus did not come to check our boxes. He came to set us free. I'm definitely a list maker, and I like to check off boxes, but I feel like she made a good point there. Only Christ can satisfy. But it is always difficult to kind of find that balance between doing what God has called you to do and also remaining at rest when God has called you to remain at rest. Like the title is based on the poor widow who donated all she had to the poor box, and Christ praised her. But it is difficult not to ask, well, if she gave all she had, how is she going to pay her rent? What was she going to eat that night? How did she know that the people in the temple were going to use her money well? Because people in power are so often corrupt. But I think part of the reason we have that story in the Gospels is as a reminder. There are some questions you just need to lay to rest and trust in God. Here is another one of the stories that stood out to me. We want the Lord to just tell us what to do, and we grow weary of waiting. We wonder how God could fulfill his promise now. In these moments of confusion, we have a choice to make. We can either listen to the voice of the enemy, the very first lie whispered to our human hearts. Did God really say? We can disbelieve that God promised us a future full of hope and believe that we have misunderstood him. Or we can choose hope. And I just thought that was such a neat point, because that is exactly what the serpent says in Genesis to Eve. Did God really say you couldn't eat from this tree? And if you have some dream that you've been waiting on, you feel like it's not going to happen, you are tempted to say, well, did God really say that that was possible? And choosing hope can be hard work, but it's definitely, I think, the work we're called to. There is a line in The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien that's like the sort of backbone lore behind Lord of the Rings. And it's about basically the God figure that is in Tolkien's world. He does not plant to no purpose. And I think that's so true. God does not plant to no purpose. Sometimes it takes a while for the flower to come or for it to see what's going to come up, but it's worth the wait. And then this isn't a specifically Lenten read, but I think Elizabeth Goudge is such a beautiful spiritual writer that she's definitely a great writer to read during Lent. There was a line in here about one of the characters. He had an indefinable air of aristocracy that was the outcome of his own secret spiritual victories, which we get a glimpse of all the different kind of secret spiritual struggles of the characters in all of Elizabeth Goudge's novels. So I've been meaning to reread the Desmarais trilogy. I have two of them here. The first is The Bird in the Tree, and the second is The Herb of Grace, and the third is The Heart of the Family. So Desmarais is a beautiful old British house located along the coastline. I actually need to go and pick up, I have a book called The Life of Elizabeth Goudge that's kind of like a biography, but it's also talking about the places that inspired, the settings of her novels, because I believe Desmarais, she did have a specific house and area along the coast in line. But Dame Rocher is in this little hamlet called Fairhaven, and I love the way she describes there's Big Village and Little Village, and Big Village is located more inland and is kind of very bucolic and sort of typical beautiful English countryside, but Little Village is like a little bit more hard-edged. It's right on the coast, so it has to endure the storms and the sea winds. There's this fantastic legend of an old ship that wrecked outside the harbor. That legend does tie in very much to the bird in the tree. That's one thing I love about Guge's works, is that she always picks some sort of lore or characters from the past and weaves it into the present of her timeline. So, you know, past and present kind of meld in such a lovely way. But here's a description of Little Village. Little Village had elbowed its way through the exquisite shifting colors of the marches, with the knowledge that they could at any time be swept away like a rainbow by the incoming storm of the sea, and had armored itself accordingly like some crustacean of the deep. So Little Village is like some lobster, you know, hunkered down, ready for the storms. The description of the sort of setting of Dame Rocher, it's like the house kind of has its own life, you know, from the people of the past, but also from the present and from the trees and from nature and from the gardens. There's a very beautiful old forest between the house Dame Rocher and the sea, and this description of it is so magical. There was seldom any sound in the oak wood except the talking of the trees themselves, for the birds preferred the sheltered garden to build and sing in, and passers-by in the wood never talked. But the trees said a good deal. In the spring, when their old branches were jeweled with flame-like, coral-tipped leaves, they whispered together of the secrets that they knew, secrets that, if communicated to the passers-by in the wood, would have taken all sorrow from their hearts forever. And in summer, when the warm rain pattered on the polished dark green surface of their full-grown leaves, and their branches swayed rhythmically in the soft wind from the sea, they would sing beneath their breath a song about a far country that they knew of. The raindrops on their leaves were the words, and the wind in the branches was the tune, and it ought to have been easy to overhear, yet not even grandmother had succeeded in catching more than the echo of it. In winter, they prayed and they meditated, or they cried out in anguish for the sorrow of the world. It's always hard to know where to stop at an Elizabeth Goode quotation, because they just go on, and they're so beautiful. Grandmother mentioned in that quotation is Lucilla Elliott. Dame Rocher is the home of the Elliots. Lucilla bought it when she was already a grandmother, and she really wanted to create a refuge for her family. This is Lucilla talking. I have tried to make life a creative art. I built up a happy and united family, and I made this lovely home. Happy homes are very important, I think, far more important than you realize, and God knows how many of them have been built up by the sacrifice of private longings. I am inclined to think that nothing so fosters creative action as the sacrifice of feeling. It's like rain coming down upon the corn. I think it is David's beloved Shakespeare who says somewhere, upon such sacrifices the gods themselves throw incense. The house that Lucilla has built is not just, you know, with the furnishings or the garden, although it's beautiful to hear her describe how like these sort of outward forms encourage the inward beauty as well. But Lucilla has gone through struggles and made sacrifices, and those are at the heart of the strength of Dame Rocher. There are some storms in family life in The Bird in the Tree. And you know, I think when I actually first read this trilogy, I started with The Herb of Grace. I was a little bit confused. It definitely would be less confusing reading it in order. And yet, picking up The Herb of Grace, I think I might like this one better. It's just so delightful, and Sally, one of the characters that we meet in this, is not in The Bird in the Tree, and the whole time I was reading this, I was like, but where's Sally? But when are we gonna get to Sally? There are just so many quotations. It's hard to pick just a few. Maybe when I finish rereading the trilogy, I'll do like a sort of review of the whole trilogy with my favorite quotations. But I'm just gonna pick 3 right now. Here's a conversation between it's about faith, because Hilary, he's the one who's part of the aristocracy with his secret, having mastered his secret spiritual struggles, while David isn't so sure about faith. I did not accept my God-given principles blindly, said Hilary. I tested them. If I had not, they would have been worthless to me. Yet you believed in them enough to think them worth the testing. Yes, said Hilary, and it is strange to me that any man who has seriously considered them, you for instance, should not think so too. I do feel that way about the modern world, that, people just dismiss faith without taking the time to actually sit down and consider it, which seems like a bad idea. Elizabeth Goudge is always weaving other poems and works into her novels, and one of them that David likes is Humbert Wolff's Uncelestial City, which I'm gonna have to look this up. I hadn't heard of it or read it before, but it's a favorite book of his. In times of storm and tempest, of indecision and desolation, a book already known and loved makes better reading than something new and untried. The meeting with remembered and well-loved passages is like the continual greeting of old friends. Nothing is so warming and companionable. Yet tonight, as so often when the mind is tortured by some undecided question, everything he read seemed to have some bearing upon his problem. All his old friends seemed to have something to say to him, and most of the time it was something that he did not in the least want to hear. Okay, I said only 3, so what should the last one be? I think I had marked down the page numbers of quotations, and there are 8 page numbers written here. I'll read you just one from The Herb of Grace, because I'm about a third of the way through this, and I had completely forgotten this beautiful, beautiful poem. It's a Browning poem that this was the first place I ever found it, and I just love it. Because thou hast the power and ownest the grace to look through and behind this mask of me, against which years have beat thus blanchingly with their reins, and behold my soul's true face, the dim and weary witness of life's race, because thou hast the faith and love to see, through that same soul's distracting lethargy, the patient angel waiting for a place in the new heavens. Yes, so I will save my list of quotations to do in a sort of full Damaroche trilogy video. Elizabeth Goudge, it's feels good for your soul and challenging and all these beautiful, turns of phrase and beautiful insights about faith, but it's also cozy and British and the characters are so warm. The only complaint, my mom has sometimes said this about Elizabeth Goudge, is that she does really take you into the mindset, into the point of view of each of the characters. So if you love one character, like Sally, it's the Herb of Grace starts with Sally, but then I think we don't see her again for another 100 pages. And it's but she's so delightful. So we are reaching the end of Lent, and I think it's been a very fruitful Lent with Elizabeth Goudge and my Blessed is She journal, but I am looking forward to Easter. I have a little stack of books here that I'm hoping to get to throughout the rest of April, so I thought before we wrapped up, I would share them with you real quickly. I had forgotten that I bought a Robert and Elizabeth Barrett Browning collection from this beautiful Everyman Pocket Poet series. They have such lovely spines, but the Browning quotation in The Herb of Grace made me think of it, and I thought I should break this in, do some more Browning reading. I'll have to see if the poem that is quoted in The Herb of Grace is in my little edition. But I am also planning to finish The Herb of Grace for sure. I meant to start Paradise Lost a little bit earlier in Lent. I didn't end up starting it until pretty recently, so I think I'll be reading it mostly after Lent. Last year I reread Dante's Divine Comedy, which I just really loved diving into it again and just familiarizing myself with it more. So I would like to familiarize myself more with Milton as well. I've just read like the first 2 books, and already there are so many famous quotations that I've heard in other works. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. I love how Milton starts his poem with an invocation to the spirit, to the divine, which I think Dante also often was praying that his words might be guided aright. Thou, O Spirit, that dost prefer before all temples the upright heart and pure, instruct me, for thou knowest, thou from the first wast present, what in me is dark illumine, what is low raise and support, that to the height of this great argument I may assert eternal providence and justify the ways of God to men. So this is another Agatha Christie that I somehow let myself buy at some point. And when I was putting books in my little circle around my April calendar girl, I was just thinking this matches the beautiful rainy dress so much. So maybe I'll let myself dive into another Agatha Christie. Also, since I'm on a roll with Lorna Hill, I'd love to get to the next sequel, The Little Dancer. And then I also got Heretics of Dune back off the shelf. I did pick this up back when I first saw the Dune movie, and I meant to get on with it. This is the sequel that I'm on. And I got like maybe a chapter in, and it just didn't capture my attention, so I'm gonna need to buckle down. I would love to hear about what you guys have been reading this spring. Definitely leave me a comment down below. I have a fun video coming up on Friday. I did some traveling this month. I got to meet up with my lovely cousin Becky, and we did some super fun shopping, so we have a shopping haul to share with you guys, and that'll be up this Friday. I think I'll probably go back to Friday uploads, although I'm thinking maybe every once in a while I might just skip a Friday and pick back up again the next Friday. It's an easy trap to fall into with the internet. You feel like if you leave it, or if you take a break, that like everything's gonna happen while you're gone, or no one will be interested in you when you get back. It's just this sort of fallacy that like, oh, you have to be on the internet. That's where everything happens. That's where everyone talks. And like, that's just not true at all. It's been very nice to be more present in real life and less present on the internet during Lent. I don't think I'm gonna re-download Instagram on my phone, so I'm probably not gonna be around there as much, which I feel like was already kind of the case, but just Lent kind of reaffirmed that it's always been a drawback of social media platforms, this sort of greediness that they have for your attention and your time. But I feel like in recent years, like on top of that is this more serious problem. Now it's not just your time and attention that these platforms seem to want to control. It's what you think is true and what you believe. The power of the internet and social media has always been free communication, that people can just say what they like and share ideas, and some of them will be wrong ideas and some of them will be good ideas. And when you look at something, you can use your own judgment to say, that sounds kind of crazy, or I know someone who that happened to, that's right, or is that right? Let me do some more research, find some more sources, give myself some more context to make a judgment for myself. But yeah, now platforms don't seem to want you to make your own judgment. They slap a little handy misinformation label on to tell you, don't look at this, don't think for yourself. You weren't thinking for yourself, were you? It's just concerning to see the censorship. It's funny because I have no real interest in diving into controversial topics myself. I do want my channel to be kind of like Damaroche, a refuge filled with bright things where you can kind of come and recharge and have a break from all the rest of the conflict out in the world, which is always going to be there one way or the other. But when I feel like the platform that I'm on no longer is a free and open space. That's just not a place I want to be. That's part of the reason I started my blog. I did some research and it seems like Substack, the owners and founders are really committed to open dialogue, different opinions, even if it's not the sort of correct opinion in the eyes of the government or the mainstream media. You can share it. I feel like that's how we solve problems as a human species, is by honest and open discussion, you know? Anyway, this is going off onto a tangent, and I have no plans of immediately leaving YouTube. Hopefully I will never feel like I have to leave YouTube. These are just things I think about sometimes and things I've been kind of reflecting on. I wish you all again a very, very happy Easter. As it says in the Gospels, Christ told us that we would have troubles in this world, but he has overcome the world, and that is what Easter is all about. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon. Stay bookish.